Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles. It was supposed to be a routine board meeting. Every 2 months, we gathered in this sleek glass-walled conference room, a symbol of the power and prestige we had built over the years. But today was different today. I wasn't just here as the CEO of Titan Enterprises. I was here as a man about to be stabbed in the back by 2 people I once trusted with my life, sitting at the long, polished table. I glanced around at the faces of my colleagues. Some were engaged. In quiet conversation, others skimmed through the agenda in front of them. At the head of the table sat Chairman Robert Langley, an old-school businessman with a no-nonsense attitude. He had always been fair, but today, fairness wouldn't be enough. I needed him to believe me. Across from me, my soon-to-be ex-wife Kelly sat with a composed expression, dressed in a sharp navy blue blazer, her blonde hair neatly tied back. If I didn't know any better, I'd say she looked like the perfect supportive wife, but I did know better. Sitting beside her was Daniel, once my best friend, now a snake in a suit. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, exuding false confidence. His smugness made my skin crawl. Then there was Joseph Wright, the assistant manager, a man who had never once made eye contact with me unless absolutely necessary. He sat near Daniel, fidgeting with his pen. Unlike the other 2. He looked nervous. He should be. I folded my hands on the table, keeping my face neutral as Robert cleared his throat and began the meeting. Before we move on to the quarterly reports, Robert said, flipping through his papers, Daniel and Kelly have brought to my attention a serious allegation that needs immediate discussion. Showtime. Daniel leaned forward. Aaron, I wish we didn't have to do this, but the evidence speaks for itself. Over the past week, there have been multiple unauthorized financial transactions, all approved from your official account. These expenses amount to over $3 million. A murmur spread across the table. I kept my expression calm. That's a serious accusation. Daniel, I said, my voice steady, and let me guess, you have proof. Kelly smiled, just a flicker, just enough to tell me she was enjoying this. We do. She turned to Joseph, giving him a nod. Joseph hesitated before pushing his laptop forward. We've recovered email records from Arank account, he said, voice low. The approvals were all made using his login credentials and were verified using OTPs sent to his phone. I exhaled. Slowly. The audacity of it all was almost laughable. Almost. Let me get this straight, I said, tilting my head. You're saying I knowingly proved fraudulent transactions while I was in the hospital for a week, getting surgery. Isn't it weird, since I never had access to my phone or my laptop, I muttered. We checked the logs, Kelly added smoothly. The approvals came from your registered devices, your work laptop, your phone. She arched a brow, pretending to be concerned. Aaron, is there something you want to tell us? I looked at her. Really? Looked at her. The woman I had once loved, the woman I had built a life with, was sitting there, trying to bury me and Daniel. He had once been closer than a brother. The betrayal burned. But I didn't let it show. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, tapping my fingers against the table. So let me get this straight, I said, looking from one to the other. You think I stole company funds using my own email while I was in a hospital bed? I smirked. Not exactly the smartest criminal, am I? You had access to your phone, didn't you? Kelly countered. You could have approved the transactions from your hospital bed. The logs show OTPs were entered correctly. And since you're the only one who had access to them, she trailed off, letting the accusation settle. I met her gaze. That's a lie. My phone was with you the entire time I was in the hospital. Her eyes flickered, but she recovered quickly, and you expect the board to take your word for it. I glanced around. The room, some of the board members were shifting uncomfortably. Others were watching, waiting for my response. I looked back at Daniel. Let me guess, Joseph here just happened to find all this evidence at the perfect time, right before a board meeting. I turned to Joseph, who avoided my eyes. Tell me, Joseph, how did you recover those who gave you access? Joseph swallowed, but before he could answer, Daniel cut in. Aaron Leighton. Not get into technicalities. The fact is, the transactions were approved from your account, and the company suffered major financial losses. The board has a duty to protect the firm, which means we have a duty to act. I glanced at Robert. He was watching carefully, his fingers steepled in front of him. You mean you have a duty to remove me? I corrected. Kelly gave me a pitying smile. It's not personal, Aaron, it's business. I chuckled under my breath. No, Kelly, it's very personal. I took a deep breath, looking around the table, one last time. It was time to show them exactly who they were dealing with, and I had one hell of a card to play. I looked across the table at my father, Chairman Robert Langley, a man who built this company from the ground up and taught me everything I knew about business. But right now, he wasn't looking at me as a son. He was looking at me as a CEO under fire, as a potential liability. My father never let emotions interfere with business. He wouldn't believe my words alone. I had to prove my innocence, and lucky for me, I was more than prepared. I turned to Daniel, watching the smug satisfaction in his eyes. To anyone else in this room, he looked like a concerned executive force to take action against his reckless CEO. But I knew better. I knew everything, and so did my brother. Matthew, for the past 3 months, I had played the long game waiting for this exact moment. Because here's the thing I knew from the very first week that Kelly was cheating on me. The late-night meetings, the sudden secrecy, the way she clutched her phone. Like it was a lifeline. It didn't take me long to figure out that the man she was sneaking around with was none other than Daniel, my best friend. My right hand. Or at least, that's who he used to be. Instead of confronting them immediately, I waited. I let them think they were being clever, let them think they were getting away with it. And while they were busy betraying me, I had Matthew dig deeper. My brother hacked into Kelly's deleted messages and pulled out conversations she thought were erased forever. He traced Daniel's secret credit card expenses, payments to cheap motels on the skirts of town where they thought no one would find them. He recovered security footage from those very motels, showing them entering and leaving together like a pair of Lovick teenagers, and then the final nail in the coffin, a recorded conversation between Daniel and Kelly outlining their plan. Because it was never just about the affair, they had something much bigger planned. They weren't just going to humiliate me. They were going to ruin me once I was out of the company. They would push for a divorce. Kelly would use whatever legal tricks she could to take half of my assets. My char? My power? Daniel would swoop in and take over Titan Enterprises, and together they would erase me from everything I had built. It was all laid out in a neat little scheme, and I had let them execute it. The hospital stay, the kidney stone surgery, a ploy I needed to step away just long enough to give them the confidence to make their move to expose themselves. And now here I was in this boardroom watching them try to bury me with a smile on my face. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, my eyes locking on to Kelly's. Tell me, Kelly, I said slowly, my voice laced with amusement. How does it feel? Sitting there thinking. You've won. Her expression barely wavered. But I saw the way her fingers tightened around the pen she was holding. I don't know what you mean, Aaron, she said, smoothly. This is about the company, nothing personal. I smirked. Wrong answer. I turned to Daniel. And you, Daniel? I assume you'll be taking my position once I'm out. Daniel met my gaze without hesitation, playing his role perfectly. The board will decide what's best for Titan Enterprises. I chuckled under my breath. I had to hand it to them if I didn't already know the truth. I might have actually been impressed, but they had no idea what was coming. I sat back in my chair, exhaling, slowly. Well, I said, looking around at the board members, I suppose it's time we get to the part where you pin your crime on me. I clasped my hands together. Go ahead. Let and hear it, because once they did, I would destroy them. Daniel rose from his seat, his face carefully, composed though I could see the eagerness in his eyes. He was enjoying this far too much, Aaron. He began, his voice steady and authoritative. "We have traced the missing fonts, the $3 million you embezzled." He paused for effect, scanning the room before. Turning his attention back to me was transferred to a bank account in the Cayman Islands. There were murmurs around the table, some board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. My father remained silent, listening, watching. I simply tilted, my head fidgeting mild interest. "Daniel continued this account," he said, pulling out a tablet, "and logging in is registered under your name." I let out a small chuckle, barely noticeable, but Daniel was too focused on his performance to catch it. He pressed a few buttons, then turned the screen towards the board to access the account. "An OTP is required right on cue." My phone buzzed on the table in front of me. Daniel smirked, and there it is. "Gentlemen, proof that Aaron Langley has access to the account because he owns it." There were gasps. A couple of board members whispered amongst themselves. Daniel straightened, revving in the moment. "This proves that Aaron took $3 million and embezzled it," he declared triumphantly. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest, watching the performance unfold. This wasn't about the money. $3 million was nothing compared to what Titan Enterprises was worth. This was about control, about power. The money was just a smoke screen, a convenient excuse to force me out, but Daniel had just made his first mistake. My father, Chairman Robert Langley, tapped a finger against the polished oak table, a sign that he was about to speak. The room fell silent. "Daniel," my father said, his voice measured, "that's amazing you actually found where the money went." Daniel nodded confidently. "Yes, sir," my father hummed, "and tell me, how did you find out the account details?" It was a simple question, but it was loaded. Daniel hesitated just for a second, but in this room even a second of hesitation was damning. He glanced at Kelly. She knew the plan she had to cover for him. Kelly straightened in her chair, plastering on a bright, innocent smile. "I found it, Dad." She turned to my father, her voice smooth and confident. "I saw the messages in Aaron's phone and started digging. That's how I found the account." Silence. Then my father smiled, a slow, knowing smile. So he said, leaning forward slightly, his gaze never leaving Kelly's, "You did have access to Aaron's phone during his hospital stay?" Kelly's smile froze. It was so small, so subtle, but I saw it the way her fingers tinned slightly, the way she inhaled just a fraction deeper than normal. She knew she had messed up Daniel. Ever the overconfident fool recovered quickly from Kelly's slip-up and turned back to my father. "Mr. Langley," he said smoothly, "even if Kelly had access to Aaron's phone, it doesn't change the fact that this is his account in the Cayman Islands. The money is in his name. That is undeniable proof that he embezzled company funds." My father turned to me, then his sharp, calculating eyes locking onto mine. There it was, the faintest smile I knew. That look, he knew. He knew everything. The pieces had already fallen into place in mind. The only thing left was to let Daniel finish playing his part in his own downfall. "Well?" my father said, leaning back in his chair, his voice laced with casual amusement. "Since we have this account open, Letton, make it easier for everyone. Daniel, connect your laptop to the main screen so we can all take a better look." Daniel hesitated for half a second, but he couldn't refuse, not without looking suspicious. So with a confident nod, he plugged in the HDMI cable, and in an instant, the large screen at the head of the boardroom lit up. The Cayman Islands bank account was displayed for everyone to see. I glanced around the table, noting the reactions. Some confused, some intrigued. Some looking at me like I was already a convicted criminal, but I wasn't worried. I knew exactly where this was going. "Good," my father said, I still locked on the screen. Then, with a voice laced with faint curiosity, he asked Daniel, "Where did you do your master's in business again?" Daniel straightened, puffing out his chest slightly, as if the question had restored his confidence. "Stanford University, sir," he answered proudly. My father smiled a knowing smile. "Ah, yes, Stanford," he repeated. Nodding, then his tone shifting just slightly, he said, "Click." On the Transactions tab, Daniel blinked. The question had caught him off guard, but there was no way out. Now he clicked the screen refreshed, revealing the transaction history of the account. There were only 2 transactions. My father leaned forward. Slightly, interesting. Let him take a closer look. The boardroom was so quiet you could hear pin drop. Everyone's eyes were glued to the screen as my father read out loud. June 21st, 2024. Incoming transaction of $1 million June 22nd, 2024. Incoming. Transaction of $2 million, or as a murmur rippled through the room. My father turned to face me, his expression unreadable but his voice calm. "Aaron," he said, "since this is your account, why don't you go ahead and transfer the money back to the company account?" I didn't move. I didn't have to. Daniel, caught up in the moment, eager to prove the final nail in my coffin, quickly made the transaction himself. And that's when my father's smile grew a slow, deliberate smile. A smile that said, "Checkmate." The room was still as my father leaned back in his chair, his fingers lightly tapping on the polished mahogany table. He exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable, then with the same casual tone that always preceded something devastating. He said, "Daniel, where?" Was this money transferred from Daniel, still riding the high of what he thought was? His victory clicked back to the Transactions tab. His eyes scanned the details before he confidently read aloud, "Robinson Fertilizers." I watched as my father's lips curled slightly, not quite a smile, but something close. A look I had seen before. The look he wore when someone had unknowingly handed him everything he needed. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out his phone without hesitation. He dialed a number, putting it on speaker for everyone to hear. The line rang once before a deep, growly voice answered. Speaking. "Hey, Charles. How are you?" my father said, in the same easygoing manner he used with everyone, the way that made people underestimate. "Hi, mowing well. Mr. Langley, what's up? I have some urgent work." My father continued, his tone still light, as if this were a casual lunch conversation. "There's this company, Robinson Fertilizers, looks like a shell company. I have the last 4 digits of the account, number 8754. Can you find out who's behind it?" There was a short pause. Then Charles said, "Give me 5 minutes, thanks, Charles." My father ended the call and turned back to the boardroom. His expression barely changed, but the energy in the room had shifted. That, he said, placing his phone back on the table, was the IRS guys. They'll find his company. I heard Kelly inhale sharply beside Daniel. She was tense, rigid. She wasn't stupid. She knew things were unraveling. Daniel, on the other hand, was still grinning, though it was beginning to look more forced. My father then turned to me, tilting his head slightly as he studied me. Well, he said, his tone sharp. "Now, do you have anything to say in your defense, Aaron?" I held his gaze calm. Too calm. He didn't like that. He wanted a reaction. I could see it in the way his jaw tined slightly, the way he leaned forward, just an inch, pushing for something. He sighed, shaking his head as if disappointed. "I see that you're awfully quiet." "That's not how a Langley should behave." Then, with a smirk, he turned to Daniel. "Learn from Daniel here," my father said. "Hugh's been so good. So far, so confident, so expressive." He gestured toward Daniel, who straightened slightly, though he was beginning to sweat. My father's eyes flicked back to me, colder now. "How will you succeed in life if you stay this quiet?" The silence in the room stretched long and tense after my father's words, his taunt hanging in the air like a blade waiting to drop. I let it settle, let them all marinate in their own assumptions. Then, without a word, I got up and walked to the door. Every eye in the room followed me. Daniel's smirk faltered just a little. Kelly stiffened, her polished nails dig into the arms of her chair. Even my father, always the master of control, raised a single brow in curiosity. I pulled the door open and looked at the security team stationed outside. "No matter what happens in this room," I said evenly, "no one enters. No one leaves. You open this door only." On my command, the lead guard, a broad-shouldered, non-nonsense guy named Greg, nodded immediately. Radioing the others within seconds, 2 more guards stepped forward, standing at attention on either side of the entrance. As satisfied, I turned back to the room, letting the heavy door slam shut behind me. The tension spiked. I walked back to my seat, set my briefcase on the table and flipped open the locks with deliberate slowness. The quiet clicks were loud in the stillness. Then I reached inside and pulled out my best friend. A 5B sledgehammer. Gasps echoed around the table. Daniel's face lost a shade of color. Kelly's eyes widened just enough to betray her fear, and Joseph Wright, the snake who had betrayed me, stiffened, his Adam's apple bobbing. Heart. I looked around the room, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Then I set my sights on the man who had made all of this possible. Joseph Wright. I walked toward him, the hammer swinging lightly in my grip, casual, almost lazy. The only sound in the room was the steady thud, thud, thud of my steps against the polished floor. Joseph swallowed. He tried to shrink into his chair, but there was nowhere to go. I stopped in front of him and spoke in a calm, even tone. Place your hand on the table. He blinked rapidly, his breath quickening. Aaron, place your hand on the table. He hesitated. I leaned in, my voice dropping low. I won't ask again. Joseph's whole body was trembling now. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His gaze darted to Daniel, then to Kelly. But neither of them moved. Neither of them were going to save him. Slowly, with shaking fingers, he raised his right hand and placed it on the table. I gripped the hammer tighter. Then I brought it down on his fingers with all my might. Joseph screamed. The sound of crushed bone and shattered cartilage filled the boardroom as he collapsed onto the floor, clutching his mangled hand. His breathing was ragged, his suit disheveled, his carefully maintained corporate composure shattered into the same pieces as his fingers. I crouched down beside him, gripping his collar and dragging him up. No, I said in a low voice. Steady. Controlled. You don't get to pass out from the pain. Just yet. I pushed him back into his chair, holding him up until his head LED forward. He was pale, sweat dripping from his brow, his good hand trembling as he tried to clutch his ruined one. Now come on, spill it all out. I leaned in, voice calm but firm. I already know the truth, but I want you to explain it. Tell me exactly how the bank account was opened. I know my name was on it. I want you to tell everyone here, how did you do it? Joseph coughed, his breathing uneven, but he could see there was no escape. He licked his lips, eyes darting to Daniel like a cornered animal. Then finally he spoke. It was Daniel. His voice was barely above a whisper. Daniel's entire body went rigid. Joseph continued, still gasping in pain. He asked me to open the account. He needed a clean slate, a new identity tied to your name. He gave me all the documents forged, then made sure everything looked legitimate. Then he asked me to give him access to the account. My jaw clenched. I already knew all of this, but hearing it out loud in front of everyone only fueled my anger. Joseph swallowed hard, glancing at Daniel again, but the bastard didn't move, didn't even blink. After that, Joseph coughed, wincing, as he tried to move his crushed hand. He transferred the money, split it across multiple accounts. Different banks then funneled it all back into that Cayman account under your name and Kelly. I asked. Joseph hesitated for only a second, then, knowing there was no way out, he exhaled sharply. She helped with the phone OTP. She had access to your phone when you were in the hospital. I let the words settle. The room was silent. I asked Joseph to place his other hand on the table. He said, please no. I said, your hand or your head. Choose wisely. You know it well by now. I will not hesitate. He placed his hand, and I blasted one more shot on his hand. That is for trying to betray me. Daniel's face had gone cold, his usual arrogance cracking at the edges. Kelly looked pale, her hands clasped together as though she could will herself to disappear. Turned to my father. He was smiling, not the warm, fatherly kind of smile. No, This was the smile of a hunter who had just cornered his prey. "Sit down, Aeon," he said casually, like we were discussing stock options and not corporate fraud and betrayal. "Have some water." I stared at him for a moment, then took my seat. A glass of water sat in front of me, untouched. My father leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto Daniel, so he said, grinning, "You did your business. Studies at Stanford, didn't you, Daniel?" Nodded stiffly, forcing a smirk onto his lips, but I could see at the faintest twitch at the corner of his eye. My father's smile widened. "Business is all about supply and demand." He leaned back in his chair, fingers interlocked as if reminiscing, You know how I learned about supply and demand?" Daniel was shaking the confidence, the arrogance, all of it had bled out of him, leaving only a man who had nowhere to run, his hands clenched into fists on the table, his jaw tight as if sheer willpower alone could keep him from breaking, but he was breaking. My father watched him amused, like a man watching a house of cards collapse. He leaned back completely at ease and continued, his voice calm and almost nostalgic. "I learned about supply and demand in Tijuana, Mexico, in the U.S. People wanted something to feel good." He went on, his voice smooth, almost conversational. "So I supplied." Daniel had snapped up. My father smiled. "I learned logistics from a close friend of mine, Angel Felix." I knew that name. Everyone knew that name. Even if you weren't in the world of crime, it was a name whispered in the dark, mentioned in hushed voices. Angel Felix Gardo. The room felt colder. My father gestured toward a man sitting at the far end of the table. "This man, right across from me. His name is Juan. He's been with me for years. A very nice man." Juan, an older gentleman in a perfectly tailored suit, offered a polite, almost warm smile. "He has a body count of 29, and next to him," my father continued, motioning to another man, "is Pablo. A very close friend. Pablo, a thick-set man with a quiet but deadly presence, merely nodded. HBL's body count is 54. Daniel made a small, strangled sound in the back of his throat. These men were my mentors. My father said his, tone full of genuine respect. "Want Tom Me accounts, Pablo, human resources." Daniel was visibly sweating now. "The IT business," my father said, gesturing around the boardroom, "is nice clean. That's why we started it." Then he looked directly at Daniel, his smile widening, "because we wanted to live a peaceful life." My father leaned forward, his fingers interlocked, his eyes locked onto Daniel like a predator watching its prey. His voice remained smooth, almost casual, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "Just because we left a violent life behind us, Daniel," he said, "does not mean we forgot how to be violent." Daniel swallowed hard, his Adam's apple. Bobbing Kelly froze. Then my father turned his gaze to her. "The moment you opened your legs for this." Man," he said coldly. We knew. Kelly's breath hitched. I saw her fingers twitch on the table, probably wanting to grab at something, anything to ground herself. But there was nothing to hold on to, nowhere to run. My father continued, his voice almost mocking. "Your husband, Aaron," he knew. Kelly's lips parted, but no words came out. "We knew the motel. We knew which house. We knew which bed. Kelly flinched the day you transferred the money. I knew." My father tapped his temple as if this was all too easy. "You see, every time money is spent, I get a notification. Silence. A heavy, deadly silence. So to think that you two would walk over me, that is just a dream." Daniel was shaking so badly now that his chair creaked. Then my father turned his attention back to me. His expression softened just a little now. "As for my son here," I tined slightly. Waiting today was a test for him. I blinked. I wanted to see if he had it in him to clear his name. My father's eyes locked onto mine, searching had he not defended himself, he said. Leaning back, he would have been fish food. By evening, I kept my breathing steady. I would have personally done it. Daniel made a strangled sound. Kelly was pale. I didn't move. I didn't react. I understood this was how world worked then. My father's expression shifted, and for the first time in this entire mess, he actually smiled. But the way he acted, he exhaled, nodding slightly. I am impressed. Something inside me eased. Then his gaze flickered to my hammer still resting on the table, and his smile grew that hammer thing. He chuckled. That was great, I smirked. Then he added, your brother Matthew did a good job. I met his gaze, my voice steady as I replied, blood is thicker than wood. My father's smile was a rare thing. It wasn't warm. It was satisfaction. It was the look of a man who had tested something and found it worthy. He got up from his chair, adjusting the cuffs of his pristine suit. Then, in a clear, steady voice, he announced, Mr. Aaron Charles Langley, I am happy to announce that from this day on you will head Titan Enterprises as the chairman of the board. My breath slowed. The room was silent, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone. Then he added, and your younger brother Matthew James Langley will take over your role as the new CEO. The other board members nodded in acknowledgement. He turned back to me and offered me his chair. I looked at him for a moment, then stood up, adjusting my suit. My fingers brushed against the worn handle of my hammer before I finally let go and walked forward. The other board members stood up and clapped their approval, ringing through the room. Some of them smiled. Others gave small nods, a show of loyalty. I reached the chair and sat down. The leather was cool beneath. My fingertips, it fit perfectly. My father took a step back, watching me. Then he spoke again, his voice calm. As for your first order of business, you have a few traitors who have betrayed us. The air grew heavy. I felt Kelly stiffen. I heard Daniel Hine breath hitch. Joseph was still on the floor, unconscious from the pain. What would be your decision? My father asked. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence linger. Then slowly I pulled out my phone. I could feel Kelly watching me. I could hear Daniel's heartbeat in the quiet. I dialed the number. The line rang once, then connected. Hello, I said, my voice smooth. I want to order 3 bowls of soup. Pause. Then a voice on the other end replied, understood. I hung up. The board members smiled knowingly. Excellent, one murmured as Oso. Another whispered. Kelly and Daniel still had no clue. Joseph, on the other hand, was already on the floor, passed out due to pain. By evening, they were gone, no explanations, no traces, just gone. The boardroom had been wiped clean, as if nothing had ever happened. The security guards had returned to their normal posts, and the building hummed with its usual controlled chaos, but we all knew. I went home that night and poured myself a drink. The amber liquid swirled in the glass, catching the dim light of my study. It was done. Kelly, Daniel, Joseph. I had made my choice the next morning as the sun painted the city in streaks of gold and shadow. I received a single message: your order has been delivered. I stared at the words on my phone. A deep satisfaction settled in my chest, but so did something else, a heaviness, a quiet kind of sadness. Kelly had been my wife. I did love her at some point. She had been everything, a woman I had vowed to protect, someone I had thought would stand beside me until the end. But love doesn't excuse betrayal, and what she did there was no forgiveness. For that, she hadn't just betrayed our vows, she had conspired against me. She had to suffer along with her buddies. But Joseph had been just upon a weak, desperate man who had let himself get pulled into something far bigger than he could handle. He had never stood a chance that evening. I made a quiet decision. I sent $100 to Joseph's mother. I had learned that he was her only son, that money wouldn't bring him back, but it would at least make sure she didn't suffer because of his mistakes. I wrote a note. Just a few words. No apologies, no explanations, just a signature. From El Martillo, the Hammer. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.